Happy Pride Month, everyone! This is a long video, but it's one that I needed to make eventually. Firstly, because it's an important topic in general and in this fandom, but also because, hi! I will say going in that I'll be using the words LGBT, or queer, in a reclaimed sense, when I need to talk about the community at large. LGBT is a shorthand term because there are significantly more identities of the community than lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and trans individuals. Just wanted to put that out there to begin with, in case it bothers you. Oh, and there will be some spoilers for the entirety of Warriors through a Starless Clan, along with some Pause of Stars spoilers during some of the headcanons. This video will broadly be split into 3 parts. The first section will cover my personal headcanons for characters in Warriors that are some flavor of queer, and the reasoning behind each. The second section is going to cover the canon reality of Warriors, why we don't have fully canon LGBT characters, and why it is important to acknowledge that. Finally, the third section will be covering what LGBT representation does in general, and why it is so important to address this issue, particularly in our current cultural climate. The sections are marked by the chapters of this video, but I'll also announce when we come to each section, so if you're someone who would just like to hear my fun headcanons and not stick around for the more serious discussions, you'll be free to, though I would personally recommend listening to all 3. Also, before we start, I'm going to do a very quick rundown of some of the terminology I'll be using. Gay usually means a man who is attracted to other men, but can also be used generally to refer to anyone who is attracted to the same gender. Lesbian refers specifically to women attracted to other women. Bisexual, or bi, refers to people who are attracted to both genders, or generally to anyone. Asexual, or ace, refers to people who do not have physical attraction to anyone. Aromantic, or aro, refers to people who do not have romantic attraction to anyone. Demisexual refers to people who only develop physical attraction after first developing a deep platonic bond with a specific person. Transgender, or trans, is a term for people whose gender identity is different from the gender they were assigned at birth. For example, a trans woman is someone who was assigned male at birth, but is a woman. And finally, non-binary refers to people whose gender identity is not that of a man or a woman, but something in between or something else entirely. For a lot of the examples in this video, I will specifically refer to the agender version of non-binary, which is people who do not refer to themselves as a man or a woman and use gender-neutral pronouns such as they, them. With all of that said, let us begin. Section 1. Headcanons of the Sun. I am admittedly not the biggest proprietor of relationship headcanons in general, which extends to Warriors. Essentially, unless it came from writing Pause of Stars, none of my headcanons involve imagining whole other stories where characters are some variety of queer or fall in love with cats they'd never speak with in canon. Most of my headcanons are rooted pretty strictly in interpreting what is available to us as readers, either from unintentional implications of the lines cats say and relationships they build, or from genuine mistakes by the authors that we can freely interpret as we please. I have no problem with, for example, someone having a headcanon that Sandstorm is a lesbian trans woman who is head over heels for Mistyfoot. Sounds great, and I'm sure there are a lot of stories you could write about that. But as I haven't written or read those stories, my personal interest lies in cases where there is some sort of evidence you can point to in canon, even if, or especially if, it was unintentional. For Warriors LGBT material, that means there, unfortunately, isn't a lot. And a lot of the headcanons I enjoy are ones you've likely heard before. Regardless, with how often I get asked about them, I figure it's worth giving them some attention. The first headcanon to bring up is, of course, Ravenpaw and Barley. These two require no introduction and are without a doubt the closest thing to a canon gay couple that the series has. Fans were already shipping these two when their mangas came out, which displayed them as having a very deep and complicated relationship, where they ultimately ended up trusting in and protecting each other more than any other cat. However, at that point, it really was just portrayed as a nice bond between extremely close friends. By the time Ravenpaw's Farewell came out 6 years later, though, Victoria Holmes fully intended to write them as a pair of mates, which comes across very easily in this story, unless you're actively avoiding engaging with the material. They're a sweet and balanced couple, and the closest thing to genuine gay representation that we have, so of course I had to bring them up first. I honestly don't put much thought into their relationship beyond thinking that it's one of the better depictions of a simple, loving relationship in the series, but they're undoubtedly a headcanon I approve of. In a similar vein, the second headcanon to bring up is, naturally, Tallstar and Jake. This couple has some form of confirmation from both Vicky, who was plotting Tallstar's revenge, and Kate Carey, who ghost wrote it. Jake would obviously have to be bisexual to love Tallstar rather than gay, because he had Scourge's litter and Firestar's litter with 2 separate she-cats. We have author confirmation that Tallstar loved Jake, but technically none that Jake loved Tallstar. That said, even just taking what is in the book, it's pretty easy to imagine a romantic spark between these two, even though it isn't as explicit as it was in Ravenpaw's farewell. As a couple, these two also appeal to me a little more than Ravenpaw and Barley, just because they have one of my favorite relationship tropes in general, where they are each able to grow as people through their relationship with each other. This is, of course, more evident in Tallstar than in Jake, but I really enjoy when characters are able to learn lessons they need by seeing how other characters live their lives. It also makes it much easier for us as readers to see what these cats love about each other, as someone who is a hard sell for romance in general. Stepping a little further away from canon, we come to Mothwing and Leafpool. This one may have been born accidentally from the fact that the first series only had a Tom point of view, but for some reason or another, Leafpaw calls Mothwing beautiful a lot. Like a very, very large amount. They also just have a nice relationship, trusting each other more than almost any other cat, even into adulthood. And while they did meet while Leafpaw was a paw and Mothwing was a wing, Mothwing was also a newer medicine cat apprentice than Leafpaw was, and more of their interactions revolved around Leafpaw helping Mothwing to learn or interpret things, rather than the other way around. Mothwing does try to teach Leafpaw to fish at one point, though, when ThunderClan is running out of prey. When they get to the lake and both of them become full medicine cats, Mothwing still comes to Leafpool for help with Willowpaw's training, and Leafpaw is always ready to defend her, particularly in her interactions with Jaypaw. They obviously have a very close bond, and with Leafpaw's remarks about her beauty, a lot of people are inclined to see it as something more, which I'm all in favor of. In my head, these two definitely have feelings for each other, but particularly after Leafpool's situation with Crowfeather, it was clear that they each cared a lot for their clans and duties to their clanmates, and neither could give that up to run off and join the other. That said, if borders were ever opened up a little to allow more frequent travel between the clans, I can easily imagine a longer distance relationship popping up there. If Leafpool wasn't dead. Up next, we have Rowanclaw as a transgender man. This one is great because it is absolutely unintentional, but Rowanclaw transed his gender in Starlight. The authors apparently always intended for him to be a Tom, but accidentally called him a she-cat, and his getting Tawny Pelt as a mate and becoming ShadowClan's deputy, then leader, were actually an apology from Vicky for that mistake. Nothing in the text contradicts the idea that Rowanclaw is trans, and he's out of the spotlight enough that we can imagine an impactful journey for him in relationship with Tawny Pelt without having to fight against canon. The only thing I don't like about this headcanon is that, Rowan Star is not portrayed as a particularly likable cat, so having him as one of our only kind of trans out of canon cats is unfortunate. But considering no authors ever intended for him, or any cat, to be trans, the pseudo-representation we have is essentially all doomed to either be not great cats, extreme background characters, or just dead. Speaking of dead, we also have Redtail as a trans man. This fandom idea was born from the fact that male cats can't usually be calicos or tortoiseshells, and in the rare case where it does happen, they are infertile. A lot of fans took this as evidence that Redtail could very well have been assigned she-cat at birth and chose to be a Tom as he grew up. That would make him a well-respected, mature deputy whose gender was never questioned by his clanmates, even by a certain cat who actively murdered him. I'm choosing to ignore the characterization Redtail gets in his novella here because that novella chose to ignore all of the existing canon surrounding Redtail, so as he is, I think trans Redtail is fun. Again, there's a lot of interesting stories you could tell around it, and he's a character who we get few enough scenes with for fans to interpret what his past and struggle with his identity might have been like, without having to contradict anything. I find trans Mosskit to be a little less appealing for that reason. Mosskit is, similarly to Rowanclaw, referred to as a Tom and a she-cat in different books. But unlike Rowanclaw, these references aren't relegated to a specific time period. During the same couple moons of Mosskit being alive, different books referred to them as both a Tom and a she-cat. And after they died, different cats in different eras have done the same. This would make a pretty good case for a gender-fluid cat who doesn't much care what pronouns people use to refer to them. But Mosskit is, a kit. and a very young one when they die. They and their siblings are explicitly so young that Mistyfoot and Stonefur have absolutely no memory of this time period when they grow up. I find it more challenging to believe, then, that Mosskit was already sure of this gender identity when they were alive, particularly as they're in a society where no one else around them has a non-binary identity. Now, if 100-moon-old Mosskit in StarClan is gender fluid, I have no issues with that. But in that case, Mosskit already being referred to as a Tom and she-cat when they were alive rings a little odd. It's still a nice headcanon, and definitely is the closest we would get to gender-fluid representation in the series, but some of the details in the evidence require some further explanation. One headcanon I have precisely no reservations about is asexual aromantic, or ace-aro, Hollyleaf. The scene in Outcast about her feeling uncomfortable around being a mate, and her determination towards other aspects of her life just struck too strong and too specific a chord. Hollyleaf is an extrovert who deeply loves her friends, but never romances any of them, including Fallen Leaves, whatever rogue out-of-book rumors are saying. This is a case where what is actually in the books shows us that Hollyleaf never got a mate through to her death, and websites are trying to retroactively make her straight in ways that contradict their own canon, lore, and timeline. What Vicky actually said was that Fallen Leaves and Hollyleaf have a special bond, but she wasn't sure if they'd become mates in StarClan, as that isn't usually something that StarClan cats do. Then it was added to the Warriors website with no citation, because the website doesn't do citations, and people have been claiming ever since that them being mates is canon. Here's the thing, though. Even if it is on the website, Fallen Leaves and Hollyleaf could not have become mates in StarClan, because Fallen Leaves explicitly can't reach StarClan. That was the whole point. He's stuck in the tunnels for eternity. Come on, guys. Anyway, Hollyleaf can be a lesbian too if you really want her to be, but to me, she will always be ace. Cats may have crushes on her, but they aren't reciprocated in any way. Another cat I think comes close to being canonically asexual is Twigbranch, though obviously she isn't aromantic. As ever, we don't know for sure, but she did actively show discomfort with the idea of having kits when Finleap brought it up, and even after their reconciliation over how he handled that, Twigbranch has never popped up in the allegiances with a random litter. Knock on wood. I also know a lot of asexual and not aromantic people end up going through similar conversations with their partners as Twigbranch had to have with Finleap. So if we are able to keep this as at least headcanon representation, it would be very nice. That said, I do have my character biases to consider as well, and while I like asexual Twigbranch conceptually, there's another asexual headcanon that I have much more attachment to at this point. Frostdawn as an asexual lesbian, ideally with Whistlebreeze as her lesbian lover. This was born almost entirely from Frostdawn's arc in Shadow. She spent this book almost entirely joyful because she finally saw a path for herself that didn't involve facing the trauma now associated with her medicine cat position. And a big part of being a warrior as opposed to a medicine cat is getting to have a mate. Most of her romance with Splashtail was, first, one-sided on her end, second, barely tied at all to any specific traits Frostpaw likes about Splashtail, and most importantly, always calls back to the idea that her getting a mate would mean fully embracing the life of a warrior over a medicine cat. The team was setting this up as a bad romance intentionally, since Splashtail would turn out to be a manipulating villain, and Frostdawn would choose to become a medicine cat again. But in the process, they also inadvertently left some additional subtext behind. Often, when you are queer, an early behavior you might take up is trying to forcefully fit into a standard straight relationship anyway, as a way of fitting in or escaping the harm that might come if you admitted your real identity, to others or to yourself. As a result, this story about Frostpaw trying to force herself into a shallow, straight romance as a way to escape the judgment of her clanmates that comes when she decides to accept herself rings as familiar to a lot of us. And it certainly doesn't help that Frostdawn and Whistlebreeze spent the arc saving each other, trusting each other, and showing off delightful chemistry that neither had with any other cat. Yeah, these are asexual lesbians if I've ever seen them. The next headcanon isn't personal for me, but I know it's close to the hearts of many, and that would be trans Nightheart, specifically that they're a trans woman. This arose because Nightheart's early arc revolves around not being seen or understood for who he is by his family or clanmates, including a lot of lines that ring especially true for trans individuals who have had to come out to their own families. Nightheart is trying to escape an identity being forced on him and wants to be known for who he is, which also includes getting a new name that he feels better reflects him, and happens to also have been inspired by a Pretty Wing Clan she-cat that he felt he resembled more than Firestar. No one writing Nightheart's character actually intended for him to be trans, or even a trans allegory, but like with Frostpaw, a lot of the lines and experiences are very familiar to queer people, so it's an easy headcanon to take on. This headcanon is a little bit complicated for me because of the overall writing problems I have with Nightheart, and the fact that a lot of his early arc relies on some of the misogynistic writing that the series falls into a lot. But it's still one of the most emotionally resonant trans metaphors I've seen in Warriors, so I'm happy to have it. Having covered 2 of the 3 Starless Clan protagonists, I figured it's only fair that we add on Sunbeam, who I definitely consider bisexual. I think what she felt for Blazefire was real, even though they didn't end up being especially compatible. And I begrudgingly accept her relationship with Nightheart, even though it repeats a lot of the icky relationship arcs that turned me off to Rootspring and Bristlefrost before them. However, I also think that Sunbeam being with Lightleap in ShadowClan or Finchlight in ThunderClan would make just as much, if not more, sense. And her rocky and complex friendships with both she-cats mirror those she had with Lightleap's mate and Finchlight's brother. I think Sunbeam is a cat who honestly just wants and thrives on love in general. So which partner she ended up with could, in my head, be more a matter of who ended up reciprocating her feelings in time. And I kind of hope it isn't Nightheart. They'd be great as friends, but I still wish the Errands had gone with their original plan and had the 2 of them break up at the end. Yeah, they wouldn't have given Sunbeam a she-cat mate either way, but I can dream. Another bi headcanon I have is for Sunfish. And arguably Leopard Star? I lean more towards lesbian for her, though. I had already built the 2 of them and their entire generation up in my head for years since reading Crooked Star's Promise, but then Leopard Star's Honor arrived, and the best thing that book did was establish this relationship for me. They're close friends, where Sunfish just happens to have very little chemistry with her obnoxious mate Beetlenose, and Leopard Star just happens to note Sunfish's immense beauty and then agrees to take care of and raise her kid for her. No big deal. It only spans 1 book instead of an arc, but the evidence here is arguably more obvious than Mothwing and Leafpool are. I appreciate them, anyway. I don't encourage people to read Leopard Star's Honor for their sake, as the book is not worth it, but it's a beautiful little nugget. One book you definitely should read, though, is A Shadow in RiverClan, which left me with 2 potential Feathertail ships that each have significantly more intrigue for me than her relationship with Crowfeather. Naturally, I'm talking about Ferncloud, blushing face and all, and Sasha, who Feathertail shares everything with and grows closer to than any other cat in the clan before she feels as though her trust was betrayed. All 3 of these she-cats have very prominent canonical Tom relationships, so I marked them down as bisexual cats who ended up choosing a Tom each, rather than lesbians who got together. But it's nice to imagine crushes cats may have had outside of the straight standards of both Warriors and our world. The next 3 I have are all pretty obvious headcanons, though we don't have much specific evidence for them. Tall Shadow, Mousefur, and Longtail are all, in my mind, asexual and aromantic. It's hard to prove a negative, but all 3 live to old ages without getting mates or even calling others beautiful or flirting, which is a nice change of pace for most characters in the cast. Tall Shadow is, unfortunately, in a place where she doesn't really have any positive equal relationships at all for the majority of her life and screen time, which I do have some reservations about since it's already a bit of a stereotype of ace-aro people. But Tall Shadow is far from uncaring, and has so many priorities and cats that she places at the forefront of her mind instead of any semblance of romance. I just can't see her any other way. Mousefur and Longtail, meanwhile, managed to live and be relatively prominent tertiary characters for 4 arcs, and neither ever had mates or romantic interactions. Plus, unlike Tall Shadow, they did each have close friends. Longtail started the series being friends with Darkstripe and Tigerstar, and then mellowed and grew really close to Mousefur when he became an elder. And Mousefur only became a consistent character when she became an elder anyway, but was equally close with Longtail, without it ever becoming romantic. These 2 are friends who never push it to become anything more, and I appreciate that. Aromantic pals until the end of their lives. I could take or leave asexual aromantic Purdy to complete the trio. I think I imagine him as either ace or bi, given his energy. I'm less sure of how to classify Jayfeather. Canonically, after Sign of the Moon, I can't claim he doesn't have any romantic feelings toward she-cats, or even that he doesn't form that sort of attraction until after a lasting bond, because he barely actually knew Half Moon at all, and they were apparently true loves from afar. The fact that Half Moon only ever thought he was Jay's wing, and that Jay Feather rarely, if ever, thinks about Half Moon when it's not one of his 2 time travel opportunities, makes me uncomfortable with their relationship in general, but it's inextricably part of canon. That said, if I had the ability to pick and choose which inconsistent aspects of Jay Feather to keep, and, as a result, pick out his orientation, I think I'd most likely make him asexually romantic as well. He could also be gay, which I know many people enjoy, but he doesn't actually have a ton of positive relationships with male characters. I am pretty passionate about him being good friends with Cinderheart, Poppyfrost, and Briarlight, though, without any of those relationships becoming romantic. I don't have much justification for that one, beyond the fact that cats being good and lasting friends without devolving into flirting is rare across all of Warriors, let alone when the 2 characters in a friendship have opposite genders. One cat I do think is gay is Flipclaw. Obviously, him and Feather of Flying Hawk had something very special going on in the background of Greystripe's vow, and while it is fully unintentional, it's a little mini relationship that I really enjoy, particularly since Flipclaw was going on that journey to find himself. They haven't seen each other since that book, and Flipclaw may have a mate now in Myrtle Bloom? The jury is still out on that one, considering the contradiction between the book and the website, and the fact that Myrtle Bloom is his, first cousin. But for now, at least, I definitely headcanon him as gay. Kestrel Flight is another gay Tom in my book. I don't have any particular feelings about who he could end up in a relationship with, but I've always thought him having a crush on Jayfeather early into their relationship could be cute. Not that Jayfeather would ever reciprocate. This one obviously doesn't have a ton of canon evidence, beyond Kestrel Flight trying to do his best to be nice to Jayfeather, and Jayfeather generally being annoyed with him and thinking he's stupid. That said, it is a nice entry point into the last section of headcanons, those born mainly from my years spent thinking about the characters in Power of Three and Omen of the Stars. Thanks to Paws of Stars, I have undoubtedly spent more time fleshing out and writing this cast compared to any other in the series, so I ended up growing attached to specific relationships and orientations for several of the characters there. First up on that front is the idea of Berrynose and Birchfall being bisexual for each other, and this one honestly just reads as funny in my head. They spend a lot of time in Power of Three together, with Birchfall acting as a strange wingman to Berrynose's random outbursts before he gets together with Whitewing. It's a really weird dynamic, because Birchfall is the slightly older warrior, but is also kind of a wimpy failure of a man, and Berrynose, though he seems to be a pretty average new warrior, is extremely confident to the point of arrogance. I think Birchfall would admire that confidence in Berrynose, and Berrynose would appreciate having someone around who actually agrees that he's impressive. I don't think they'd be especially healthy together at that stage in their lives, but it's fun! The decision that Dovewing is demisexual came up very early in the process of outlining Paws of Stars. I am really not a fan of her relationship with Tigerheart and Omen of the Stars, for a variety of reasons, but part of it has to do with how superficial, instantaneous, and manipulative it comes off. Even on the Beaver journey, where they should have had time to bond, we didn't get much more than Tigerheart instantly being protective and Dovepaw feeling uncomfortable. Then when Tigerheart ends up going behind her back and capturing her sister to use as ransom, the relationship dynamics here just don't sound healthy. So in making the Paws of Stars version, and also knowing that I was going to cut down on the more ugly things Tigerheart does, I wanted to be sure that the two of them really genuinely bonded and had personal and value-based reasons to be together. I wanted to like them as a friendship before I introduced anything romantic, and Dovewing being Demi just naturally followed from that. Ivypool's orientation is one I thought far less about, because, frankly, relationships would be the least of her concerns for the vast majority of this story. I don't think she's straight, but she could realistically be ace, bi, or lesbian without disrupting my idea of her. Within the realm of canon, you do have to deal with Fernsong as a mate, and the fact that she has kids, and I don't particularly like the idea of her final love interest being Blossomfall, since their relationship was mostly antagonistic and unresolved, but beyond that, I don't have any particular thoughts about her potential partners or romantic prospects. One pair I am absolutely sure of is Hazeltail and Icecloud. Both are lesbians. Hazeltail once had a small crush on Hollyleaf, but it faded in time, and then was essentially torn apart when Hollyleaf pushed everyone away, disgraced ThunderClan at the Gathering, and ran away. Icecloud was one of the only stable friends she had at the time to comfort her through that, and Hazeltail deeply appreciated it. It turns out Ice Cloud is actually a cat who was really interested in helping others sort through their feelings, something she saw a great need for in the clans, and Hazeltail made it her duty to ensure that her wife's work wasn't wasted. They're a nice, balanced relationship, and it exists entirely in Paws of Stars because I don't think these two even spoke in canon. It's just that neither got a mate because they, and Toadstep, all died too quickly of green cough in between books. But I needed a lesbian couple, and with the personalities and arcs I was designing for these two, I knew they would work together well. They are my lovelies. On a similar note, Cinderheart is, to me, bisexual. I think she actually had feelings for all three of the Power of Three protagonists at one point or another, but ended up going with Lionblaze, either because he was the only one who reciprocated, or because, as their lives progressed, when Cinderheart was ready to start a long-term relationship, she and Lionblaze were on the most even paws. I don't believe it's a radical perspective that Cinderheart and Lionblaze's relationship in canon is somewhere between extremely dull and amazingly frustrating. But I will say that for Paws of Stars, I spent an awful lot of time tinkering with them, both as individuals and in their relationship, to make this couple something I could actually enjoy. So in that specific iteration, I don't think Cinderheart needs another mate. She has plenty of other attractions, though. For another case of one-sided attraction, we can turn to Foxleap, who I quickly determined was very gay. In canon, Foxpaw had precisely one scene showing Tigerpaw, Dawnpaw, and Flamepaw around when they first arrived to stay in ThunderClan before he caught the green cough and never interacted with them again. However, for Paws of Stars, I really wanted Tigerheart, and all of the ShadowClan trio, to have a deeper link to ThunderClan, ideally with more than just their kin. And Foxleap was the quickest place to reach for that. When I combined this with Foxleap becoming a Dark Forest trainee with Tigerheart, and thought out different possibilities for his motivations and his relation to his very lesbian sister, I eventually figured out that, oh, this little fox boy has a crush. And it is not reciprocated. Tigerheart is tragically straight. I find this relationship to be equal parts endearing and comical, and I used it as such in the story, but following the end of Paws of Stars and Foxleap's move to another clan, I always figured he would find a Tom to call his own one day. You're free to choose who that is, but due to some character backgrounds I did for Tempest Rift, when I needed to jump forward in the timeline for a post-Paws of Stars D&D campaign, I gave him Mallownose as a mate. Take that as you will. Another couple I definitely got into because of Paws of Stars is Rosepetal and Sunstrike, a relationship that also has absolutely no basis in canon. However, once I set up the two of them as a pair of trainees in the Dark Forest, and especially once I delved deeper into their personalities and motives for both Paws of Stars and Tempest Rift, Sunstrike's own story, I knew they just had to be lesbians. Rosepetal is also in an interesting position where different in-universe canon characters and Aaron authors have tried to start pairing her up with a Tom, and it kept fizzling away or being cancelled. So yeah, she's up for claiming, and I claim her as a lesbian. If you haven't read Tempest Rift, I'd recommend it to see how I ended up conceiving of this relationship in its early stages, but as far as Paws of Stars is concerned, they fully get together by the end. Also coming up from Tempest Rift, we have Thistleheart, who I now headcanon as agender. Generally speaking, finding canon-compliant places to put non-binary cats is difficult, and it does hurt me a bit that Thistleheart dies, off-screen, very soon after getting her warrior name. I even knew going into Tempest Rift that I would be writing her death. That death is what gave me the freedom to make them non-binary, but it also feeds into the bury your gaze trope, which I'm less fond of. That said, spending several months thinking about characters will always give you more depth and appreciation, and Thistleheart definitely got that treatment. I got to explore their relationship with their sisters, the dynamic they had as a trio and with Sunstrike, and how their coming out has gone with their family. While I didn't get to put every detail I thought of into the story due to its length, I did get to show or imply a lot of it, and I love Thistleheart more now than I ever did before. That, however, is the final headcanon I have to share. You might have noticed, particularly after the first couple, just how many of those headcanons had caveats or had to be invented from scratch based on characters who were ignored enough in canon to not get any details. That is true, yes, and as someone who tends to prefer and create relatively canon-compliant headcanons, that is a hurdle I've had to deal with. It's also why I find it so important to discuss. Section 2. The Canon Reality. Within the strict canon of the books, with no headcanons applied, there are no examples of cats who are gay, asexual, trans, or otherwise. Aside from that terminology never being used, we also have no pairs of toms or she-cats who are described as mates, certainly none who adopt kits, as if adoption was ever portrayed particularly well in Warriors. We have no cats who confirm they will never be interested in a mate or kits without it either being revoked later or being driven by duty or trauma. We have no cats who express romantic interest in both toms and she-cats. And in fact, this one is especially tricky due to the incredibly small number of cats who even have crushes before they settle down with their one true love forever. And we absolutely don't have cats who, within the text, intentionally start using different pronouns or a different name or presentation due to a conflict between the gender they were assigned at birth and the one they know themselves to be. We don't have any non-binary cats at all, even unobtrusive examples. As soon as a cat appears in the story, they get stamped as either a tom or a she-cat, and that is never something that changes. The Aarons have never brought up gender identity headcanons at all. The closest they came was with Rowanclaw, making a mistake with his gender and giving him a more prominent role as a result. Vicky apparently thinks he should have always been a she-cat instead of a tom, but nothing in this conversation or since has suggested that in-universe Rowanclaw went through a change in gender. Rather just that his gender was not given much thought before, and he was therefore given two descriptions as a mistake on a meta level. What the Aarons have been, at least slightly, more vocal about is gay relationships. During a chat with the Aarons in June of 2009, just between Power of Three and Omen of the Stars' releases, to give you an idea of the timeline, one question that came up was if there was ever something the Aarons wanted to add to the series, but couldn't because of the young target demographic. Victoria Holmes answered this with one long paragraph about how she writes more for people than children, and can get away with a lot more because they're working with cats rather than human characters. However, there were two things that wouldn't ever fit into the books, with one of them being inappropriate substances, and the other being homosexuality. Her reason for both was that they don't fit into a series with feral cats. It is somewhat unclear from the phrasing of the statement how Vicky actually considered homosexuality at the time, but I'm not going to speculate too far on that given how long it has been and how little we have to go on. What I will say is that homosexuality can absolutely fit into a book about feral cats when it's Warriors. Real-life cats are most often probably best classified as bisexual, as they'll essentially go for whoever is around when they need satisfaction, but it is more complicated than just slapping a human sexual orientation onto a cat. However, as has been pointed out by many people over the years, the cats in Warriors are intelligent humans in cat bodies, who have some cat-like behaviors. They don't deal with straight romance in the way that real-life cats do either. They don't form the same sort of group dynamics or demonstrate the same values that real cats do. They have politics and religion and actual magic and a sweeping history and xenophobia accompanied by specific stereotypes for other groups. If you want to have one of them fall in love with someone of the same gender, you absolutely can. And because that possibility exists, and has existed for over 1,000 cats and 20 years of writing, it becomes more glaring that the only orientations that exist are, seemingly, straight and undefined. There are exactly 2 exceptions across the series that have even out-of-book backing from the authors. The first is Tallstar and Jake. Following the writing and release of Tallstar's Revenge, Kate Carey, who ghostwrote the book, mentioned that Tallstar never took a mate for the rest of his life in WindClan. His heart always belonged to his Jake. That is adorable, but it's also notably on Kate's personal blog and not on official Warriors channels, or especially in the books. Victoria Holmes also commented on this pair recently, mentioning that while Barley and Ravenpaw are like a strong, lasting marriage, Tallstar and Jake had a fleeting romance, possibly unspoken. While she was outlining the book, she knew there was something between them, but didn't want to pry into their personal lives to figure out exactly what it was. Tallstar's Revenge was definitely written from both sides with the knowledge that these two are very gay for each other, but it was never explicitly stated within the text. The second is Ravenpaw and Barley, who, as I mentioned earlier, were written in Ravenpaw's farewell as mates. They share their lives exclusively with each other, care more for each other's well-being, and know each other better than is true for any other relationship, and their relationship is explicitly shown using the word love. However, notably, that only happens once and is said by a third party rather than either Ravenpaw or Barley. Victoria Holmes mentioned this one very directly on Facebook, stating that they are, of course, a couple, and that this was something she intended them to be from the start. However, the earlier books were written in a different time, when it wasn't possible to be as open about these sorts of relationships. I'm not about to accuse Vicky of lying either in 2009 or 2022, and I don't know what went on in her head when she was writing these two statements. But the relationship we have in the books was definitely much, much more ambiguous prior to Ravenpaw's farewell. And it's important to mention that even in Ravenpaw's farewell, these Toms never say "I love you" to each other, and the word mate is never used. I bring this up because, as members of the LGBT community, or people who are already familiar with and supportive of gay relationships, it can be easy to see Ravenpaw and Barley or Tallstar and Jake as the husbands and lovers they are. However, because it wasn't made explicit with any of the language normally associated with Warriors couples, or even couples in general, people, and often children, who either weren't aware of or weren't supportive of queer relationships will often ignore the subtext and conclude that they are friends, or like brothers, or even get angry at anyone who claims them to be interested in each other romantically. I've seen plenty of arguments in the fandom, and even my comment sections around Ravenpaw and Barley, from people who insist that they see them as just good friends, and they bring up the lack of direct confirmation in the language as evidence for it. And all of the other lesbian, asexual, bisexual, trans, and other queer headcanons don't even have that level of subtext. The authors haven't even acknowledged, let alone confirmed, any queer headcanons after Tallstar and Jake and Ravenpaw and Barley. This means that, yes, even the most popular lesbian ship, Mothwing and Leafpool, has no claim to canon validation. In fact, the closest comment we have on that one is actually a denial of canon validation, Kate Carey saying she saw them as besties rather than something more. And of course, nothing resembling a trans headcanon even reaches that level of popularity among the fandom. We don't have any concrete idea of why this is the case. Vicky mentioned vaguely that it was a different time early in Warriors writing, which would have been through the 2000s, but even to this day there aren't any gay relationships confirmed in the books. Some have blamed other countries for this, as Warriors is also published in Poland, Russia, China, and other countries where LGBT relationships are still more of a taboo. This has always been a bit of a reductive argument, though. I'm sure those countries would have several audience members, editors, and publishers who would not be okay with any sort of queer content. However, that's something we can also very easily say about Western countries, and placing all of the blame on other countries takes away from the responsibility we have to make our own countries better. In the last decade, and across multiple different administrators in different countries, we've still had consistent movements going on to take books with any sort of queer characters off the shelves of school libraries, local libraries, and bookstores. And many of these books end up on banned book lists, and/or end up being hounded with thousands and thousands of negative reviews by people who don't even know the content of the books beyond the existence of an LGBT identity in it. Turning away from other countries, then, some will instead blame HarperCollins as a publisher for the lack of explicit queer characters in Warriors, saying that they have restrictions on the companies and authors they work with forbidding them from including those sorts of characters or relationships. But it can't be that simple either, because HarperCollins has book sections and public publicity pages devoted specifically to books with LGBTQ individuals. That, of course, doesn't mean that the entire company is supportive of these identities, but it does mean that they can't have a unilateral ban on queer content. One could then look to working partners as the company the errands belong to, who dictate, in the modern era, what content goes into their books. They definitely have something to do with the conversation, but we don't know who these people are or what sort of control they're exerting in this particular area. And the books have lacked queer content long before and long after they became the de facto creators of Warriors. Basically, we don't have any one individual or company or country to blame for this. What led to there being no LGBT cats and Warriors is a lot of different people over a lot of years in a lot of different situations, all continuously choosing to not include it, passively. The authors and editors behind Warriors have had shifting and often unknowable opinions on queer relationships and identities, but the reality we do have to face as a fandom is that there is an extremely small amount of representation that has any of their explicit approval, and precisely none that has explicit confirmation in the books. This is important to acknowledge in Warriors as it would be in a lot of media, because of the idea of... Section 3. Queer Representation. Choosing what types of characters you add to your fictional casts matters a lot in the context of the world you're writing in. Whether you're choosing to portray women with a variety of personalities and positions in society, members of different races, ethnicities, and cultures all coexisting and respecting their differences, or people with different queer identities having a diverse array of experiences, people who read your stories will notice and become intimately familiar with these characters. and it can help them to, over time, understand that all of these people are normal and should be accepted for who they are. This is especially true with children and teens, as Warriors typically caters to, since they may not have had a vast array of experiences with people unlike themselves yet, and are still at a stage where they can develop their ideas and morals. Warrior cats don't have races or ethnicities in the way we would think of them, but I've discussed in several videos how the xenophobia clan cats have for anyone outside their culture can be nonsensical and even harmful. And I've discussed at length how the gender portrayals across the series reflect more of our real-world stereotypes than the real array of women that exist. LGBT representation is in much the same boat. If you're a member of the LGBT community, and particularly if you haven't discovered or been willing to discuss your identity yet, then seeing characters in fiction who have that identity and are either shown as a normal part of the world, or given an arc in which to explore the challenges of having that identity in a world that rejects you, can genuinely help to grow your own sense of self and confidence. It gives you evidence that you aren't alone, and sometimes even language to point to in explaining yourself to those around you. Meanwhile, if you aren't a member of the LGBT community, or if you are only aware of a portion of it, then seeing these characters will broaden your understanding of people unlike you, and show you that people who are different are still perfectly natural and worthy of respect, or show you the challenges they might face in your society. How and when we portray these characters in fiction means a lot. To make a character good queer representation, there are two things you must do, with an optional but ideal third. The first is to simply portray the characters having a specific queer identity, gay, bi, ace, trans, etc., and to make it clear within the story that this is their identity. Remember that we're trying to use this representation to expose people to identities they may not have heard of, meaning we need the identities of characters to be clear and explained, without readers having to scour Facebook and blog posts from individual members of the creative team. The second requirement is that once you have one or more queer characters, you treat them as you would any other character in the story. Give them relationships, goals, feelings, and a place in the world like every other character has, or should have. Warriors isn't great about that as a baseline. Basically, don't single them out as being the only character without a complex personality or place in the story, or only have them give an opinion when the subject of their identity comes up. This helps to cement them as a genuine part of your world, and is essential for teaching new readers that LGBT individuals are normal people who should be treated just as you treat anyone else. Third, we have an item that is technically not a requirement, but is ideal to providing great representation. Avoid stereotypes. Many LGBT identities have specific, long-held stereotypes around them, and if the one or two characters you have created with that identity all fit perfectly into those stereotypes, it's probably going to put off people who have that identity, and potentially reinforce the stereotypes as being true for people not of that identity. But maybe you're a writer who doesn't have the identity of some characters you're writing for. How would you even know what stereotypes to avoid, or find out what people from that identity actually are like, deal with, or care about? Well, people who stick to very specific deadlines won't like to hear this, but there's this thing called research? A quick internet search will get you to some of the stereotypes commonly associated with a particular queer identity, and can often get you personal stories from people who actually have that identity. If there are people you know in real life with that identity, talking to them can give you a broader view and give you the chance to ask particular questions. But any way of accessing the stories of real LGBT people will get you closer to the truth than vague assumptions. Having said all this, Warriors doesn't have any good queer representation. They actually do fine with the two queer couples they sort of have on avoiding stereotypes and treating them as they would other characters, but they have not made it clear to their audiences, within the material those audiences will be reading, that they are even trying to have queer representation. That's why I'm so often hesitant to give them credit for Ravenpaw and Barley or Tallstar and Jake. They were written with romantic intentions in mind, as far as we can tell, but plenty of kids and stubborn adults come away not even realizing they read about romance. The situation Warriors is in with their queer representation is different than their gender divide issues. The Aarons haven't put any bad representation into their books, so there's nothing that we need to remove. However, they haven't done much that I would consider helpful or good representation either. As with many other aspects of their writing, they've continuously chosen the static, safe route instead. They don't include LGBT characters at all so as to avoid upsetting any of the communities they sell to. and keep the positive LGBT representation limited to Easter eggs available mostly only to existing fans who were already looking for it. Now, maybe you're coming away from all this thinking it's fine for Warriors to play it safe. After all, no author or story is or should be forced to include specific representation. I would agree, to a point. Forcing authors to include representation when they weren't thinking about it before can sometimes lead to bad representation. However, Warriors authors have shown an interest in queer representation already, through their 2 out-of-canon gay couples and even some subtext left in the mangas by James L. Barrie. While I would love to see some trans representation, for example, that isn't something that's ever been hinted at, in or out of the books. What I would ask from Warriors in particular is just that they make it clear in the books when their couples are couples, in the same way that they flippantly stick Lionheart and Frostfur or Blossomfall and Thornclaw together, so that this can count as representation at all. If they, or frankly, if any authors out there are, willing to include a wider array of representation, I always am and would be very happy to see that. I'm following that logic with my own in-progress story right now. But for Warriors specifically, all I would ask is for the cementing of what they already, sort of, have. Before we conclude, though, there are 2 more questions that need answering. First is why LGBT relationships and identities are so important to portray and represent well in our current world. And second is how we should treat LGBT headcanons for characters who aren't explicitly LGBT in their original works. Let's begin with the first question, as I believe it will help to answer the second. LGBT+ identities are not new. Identities of all forms, gay, asexual, trans, and otherwise, have existed throughout all of human history and across numerous different cultures. Different countries and time periods have had different standards for what they consider normal, with several including prominent representations of gay relationships, or gay gods, trans people, non-binary individuals, and, again, gods, and people who don't have any sexual or romantic feelings. The terminology we use in the modern day didn't always exist, but the identities did, and this is because people have always been variable in ways that go against the expectations of the majority. Being LGBT of any form isn't and hasn't ever been a choice, either that an individual makes for themselves or that other people can force someone into. I don't have a choice over whether or not I fall in love with people. My friends don't have choices over whether or not they can fall in love with people of the opposite gender, or whether they fall in love with anyone. Just as with straight people, the individuals that you fall in love with are not in your control, and are often determined by a combination of factors. Their personality, whether their appearance is appealing to you, any bonding moments you've shared, and whether you nebulously get along, etc. Even if someone loves you, you may not be able to love them back. And even if you love someone, it doesn't mean they'll love you. The only difference with people of different sexual orientations is who they have tended to find themselves falling for. Trans and non-binary individuals are in much the same boat. They don't have a choice over whether or not they feel comfortable in the body, name, pronouns, or gender presentation they were expected to have since they were assigned a gender at birth. If they self-examine and recognize feelings of discomfort, they may choose to present differently, go by a different name or pronouns, or try to access hormone therapy or surgery in order to help their intense discomfort, depression, or otherwise that results from the disconnect between who they know themselves to be and what others immediately perceive them to be. Professional and well-recognized medical organizations across the world have recognized transgender people as real, and have noted that gender-affirming care, often beginning with therapy and with possible options for hormone therapy or surgery at different, later, points in life, is the way it should be addressed. Since the issue is really the intense discomfort they have based on the perception they have in public, and not the fact that they have a different perception of themselves than they should. As a result, the idea that people can be forced into being some flavor of queer by parents, friends, educators, or internet figures is flat out untrue. Even if it were a choice, which it is not, being gay, bisexual, asexual, trans, or otherwise is in no way a bad thing. It's just about loving or living in the way straight and cisgender people are able to by default, and no one is hurt. So the necessity some people feel to argue or fight against these people is entirely unwarranted. Why are people railing against these identities now, though? As I mentioned, LGBT people have existed under different terms for all of human history. It's not a new sensation. But in the last 20 to 30 years, and as a result of several intentional activist movements, LGBT identities have become more ingrained in the public consciousness, allowing more people who are queer to access resources that put words to their feelings and help them identify who they are. Such as fiction representing those identities, or individuals on the internet or in their personal lives sharing their stories. Those people can then openly identify themselves with their peers, who, in turn, can learn from them what LGBT identities are like, and may either identify those identities in themselves or pass the knowledge on to others. The increase in LGBT individuals comes from people realizing that they are LGBT, rather than becoming LGBT. Your identity also isn't a fully clear and stationary thing. Many people will even identify one way for a period and then realize they are something else and describe themselves differently. It doesn't invalidate their previous identity, but is rather a new step in their journey of self-examination. One of the biggest reasons LGBT people have been getting more media attention recently is in response to political pressure. The recognition and rights of these identities has been an ongoing discussion with numerous activist movements throughout history. But gay marriage becoming legal, bisexual and asexual identities being more widely spoken of, transgender healthcare being allowed by law in some areas, and other measures have caused LGBT issues to become more widely known. As awareness of these identities grew, there was a cultural backlash from people who felt this was an affront to the normal world they had come to know. Because queer identities weren't a part of their world, they acted as if queerness was a new social or even political fad. Some individuals discriminated against and refused to learn about LGBT people due to discomfort with the concept of new ideas or in order to preserve a finite impression of their world and its rules, or due to long-held cultural preconceptions about the very morality of being gay or trans or otherwise. With the rise of this backlash, discriminating against LGBT individuals actually became a political tool. The LGBT community is a minority with very little power, and could very easily be used as a political scapegoat as a result. Politicians have wielded their political power to point the blame at LGBT people for any political, social, or economic problems that they and the country or world have been struggling under for years. The use of queerness as a political mantle, in turn, created an even larger cultural backlash from people who weren't aware of LGBT issues before, but were either aligned with specific politicians or just happy to have someone to blame for the genuine problems the country is facing. In addition to preventing people and governments from actually solving the economic, racial, and international problems they are facing, this strategy also, of course, causes an immense amount of harm for LGBT people. In both offline and online situations, queer people often have to face harassment, denial of their identities, discrimination in the workplace, being kicked out of their houses, being assaulted, or even face death as a direct result of their identity or assumed identity. On a wider scale, different governments across the world have been actively devaluing LGBT individuals, stripping them of their rights or allowing discrimination if it's on the basis of their identities, and spreading rhetoric that encourages more people to harass LGBT people. LGBT people, in turn, often speak out more and take more open pride in their identities as a countermeasure to that rhetoric. It should not be such a challenge to just be who you are, but for LGBT people at this point in history, it very much is. I've left some resources in the description if you would like to look further into the topic. I particularly recommend many of PhilosophyTube's recent videos if you're interested in video essays, as she has broken down a lot of modern political topics and how they tie into LGBT identities and popular philosophers. Because of the large movements trying to dismiss queer experiences, remove their access to healthcare and legal protection, or make it very difficult to even discover and deal with their identities in the first place, it is even more important that creative people show open, normal, and clearly portrayed characters who are in the LGBT community. It's true that this isn't a requirement for any individual author, series, or company to include any particular type or amount of queer characters. But it is the responsibility of the creative community at large to put queer characters of all various types into a variety of stories, so we can do our part in normalizing the experiences of these marginalized people, and helping to build a cultural consciousness that will actively fight for the rights of people around them. On a personal level, it also helps people to appropriately approach conversations with children, friends, family, and otherwise who may be LGBT. The important thing is always to be respectful of them, and accept them for who they are. If someone says they are trans, gay, ace, bi, or otherwise, that is their identity. They may come to further self-examine and alter their identity in the future, but it's not your job to force that. It's your job to help them enjoy who they are today and fight for their right to be who they are. Queer headcanons fit right in with this as well. My personal headcanons all stem from things that have clear evidence in either canon or my personal writings, in order to acknowledge the lack of concrete LGBT representation in the canon series. But that's not a universal approach to take, and no one is obligated to follow it. Headcanons are always going to be something that isn't fully corroborated by the text of the story. That's why it's a headcanon instead of just a canon fact. Few to no people creating LGBT headcanons believe they are fully true within the original stories. But most often, when people choose to headcanon characters with a certain LGBT identity, it's because there are so few canon examples in fiction that they can look to in order to see themselves or their friends in a positive light. It's not harmful to allow these headcanons to exist, or to create them yourself. If any of this is confusing for you, it's always better to seek out more information, either from online resources or from people you meet who are willing to speak to their experiences, so that you can better understand the perspectives of people unlike you. If I can help you understand one thing, it's that queerness isn't a belief system. We don't subscribe to certain views of the world that you don't, and we don't have a set of beliefs that you can debate against. We are a reality. We are a set of people that exist and just happen to not be like the majority in some way. What we need is not persuasion to be something else, but acceptance for who we are, and support to help get us the legal rights and social acceptance that others get automatically. To those of you who are queer yourselves, and I know that accounts for many of you, know that you are exactly who you need to be, and whatever time you need to spend finding out who you are and how to share that with people you trust is time worth spending. If there aren't people in your immediate vicinity that you can trust to support you, then reach out to counselors, friend groups, or even message boards online until you find people you can trust. Until then, and even after that, know that there is plenty of media available for you to see yourself, either in what is already canon or what you can headcanon in. If knowing that Ivypool is a lesbian or Rosetail is trans helps you to feel more at peace with yourself, then you should keep that knowledge. It's hurting no one, and it's helping you. We don't have a lot of canon representation across any fiction yet. So for now, especially, it's more than all right to make your own. Warriors isn't alone in this fight, and I'm not putting the blame on them for lack of LGBT representation in general. But with how much of our community is LGBT in some way, and how many hints have been given over the years without canon validation, it is something I think they should be aware of. Hopefully, maybe, in the future, someone on the team will consider these ideas and decide to enact real canon change. But even if they don't, there are other books that do, and I encourage you to give them a look, or even write some yourself. Thank you for watching. And always remember to be kind to others, and to yourself. Embrace who you are today, so that you can let yourself become who you'll be tomorrow.